check. Okay. All right, so we've gotten rid of all the controls, all the layer, adjustment layer, all that kind of stuff in here, and we're just gonna take this one at a time. So the first thing is, again, I need to orient the girl so that she's got the lighting is coming on her from the same direction as that's happening in my background. So to do that, make sure that you're selecting the composite body layer, come up to the edit menu, down to transform, down to flip horizontal, and she will go in the opposite direction. And already it's beginning to make a little bit more sense to me, especially because this whole area over here is a little bit lighter. So the next thing I want to do is when I look at this background, I feel like that this is a little bit oversaturated. It's a little bit hyper saturated to me. But there are two controls about this, and Zayden, when he did his, he actually, I think, saw the same thing. He dropped the saturation on this a little bit, but I want to show you two different ways and things to keep in mind when you do this. Now, controlling the background is in many ways easier to do than it is to actually do the bodies, because in the background case, you just need to put adjustment layers on top of it. You don't need to do any clipping. You don't need to do any of that kind of stuff, because it's only impacting what's underneath it, which is the background. The only reason that we change things when we are working on the body is that you want to only impact the body and not the entire composition. So to do this, there's two options that we've got. The first one is just a regular hue saturation layer. So if you come down, make sure that your background copy is selected, and then come down, and we are going to add an adjustment layer, and we're going to add a hue saturation layer to this. And when you do that, then you can come up and you can grab the saturation, because the whole thing is overly saturated, I think. If you click on it and start to pull it down, you'll see that it actually starts to drop the saturation pretty good. However, this is also changing the tone of my images. I don't want to do that. So again, I'm going to change the blending mode of this hue saturation layer from normal down to saturation, so that the only thing I change in here is the saturation and not the tone of the image. And now when you start to drop this back, you see it sucks out some of that saturation, but I'm not changing the tone of my background, especially the leaves and the trees up in here. Those aren't changing their tone at all. So this is one way to do it. The thing about this, though, is that it impacts all of it impacts everything in this image equally. So the things that are really saturated, it comes after them, but the things that are not very saturated, it comes after them too. And sometimes I think that ends up being too powerful a control. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. So dial in the way that you feel like the saturation looks the best. If you want the same sort of one that I've got right here, I'm feeling like it's somewhere right around a -30 in the saturation. If you want the same as mine, go ahead and dial that in. Then I'm going to turn this eyeball off, and I'm going to show you a different tool. They have now added vibrance as an adjustment layer. So if you come back down, we're going to add a second adjustment layer. Click on this and come up, and at the very top of this, they've added a couple new ones here. They've added clarity and dehaze is now an adjustment layer, grain is now an adjustment layer, and color and vibrance now. These are all relatively new, kind of in the last year anyway. So I'm going to click on vibrance here. And then in vibrance, if you click on the blending mode of vibrance, you'll see that you don't really there's not a vibrance blending mode here, but vibrance is still a saturation move. But however, vibrance has got, so I'm going to change mine to saturation again. Vibrance is a very specialized version of saturation. What vibrance does is it looks like, so when you're adding vibrance, it's easier to think about when you're moving it in a positive direction. What it does is it looks at your images and it says that things are really saturated, I'm going to stay off of those. Things that are not very saturated, that's what I'm going to do. So it tends to boost things that are not very saturated, and it stays away from the things that are already very saturated, so you don't cross that line too quickly. So if we now take our vibrance slider, and you'll see there's a saturation slider in here as well, works the same way. And then just drag this and start to pull this back. And you can see in many ways, it actually, for me, it steps on things a little bit easier. I feel like I get to a point that's a little bit, for me personally, I like this a little bit better. So I'm also in my vibrance in the sort of lower mid-20s in terms of my drop down. Now, if we want to look at the difference in these two, again, if you come over to your history panel and you click on the little camera at the bottom to snapshot it, this one that I have right now that I'm looking at has got vibrance is on and saturation is off. So I'm going to call this vibrance. and say okay, and then turn vibrance off, and then turn your saturation, your desaturation as it were, back on, and snapshot that and call it saturation. Because now we can actually go back and forth between the two in history. So if you go all the way up to the very top, this is where they both exist, and we can do these on and off really quickly. Now, it's a real subtle difference in here, but I still feel like I'm liking, actually, it's interesting I would say this now, because last night I was liking the vibrance better, but right now I'm liking the saturation move better. So that's the one I'm going to pick. And at this stage of the game, we can just continue to work with this. So my next move in here is to go ahead and run my check layer. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the composite body to make it active, because my check layers need to be on top of all of this. So I'm going to click on the body to actually do that. And then I'm going to go to my actions palette, and I'm going to find my check layers. Does everybody have their check layers installed? Does anybody not? All right, click on check layers, and then again, at the bottom of your actions palette, the little arrow that's pointing to the right, click on it to run it. And in this case, I get pretty wild color stuff that's actually happening in here. I'm not going to start with the color check layers on, so at the very top of your check layer stack is where you got your check layer colors. It's a group. There's 2 layers that are doing the color part, so you can just turn off the eyeball for the group and everything looks normal again. And I start with luminosity, so I'm going to click on luminosity, and this is basically where we're going to start in this image. So the first thing that I look at in this image is the contrast, and you can see what I'm looking at are what do the flowers and the leaves, what does the shadow side of them all look like? And so you can see all these flowers in here are actually even the trees. You can look at the trees on this side. I'm looking at the shadow side of them, and they're nowhere near as dark and heavy and deep as they are on this figure. So I'm going to lift the shadows to begin with. So you click on the body composite. Again, the way you control shadows is, especially in contrast, when you're trying to lighten contrast, you do not use curves to do this. You use the shadow highlight filter to do this. Unfortunately, the shadow highlight filter is not in the filter drop-down menu. It is actually in the image menu. So come up to your image menu, down to adjustments, down to shadows and highlights. And a thing will open up, and in the shadows and highlights that actually opens up, by default, if you only see a little bit there, if you don't have a big panel here like I do, there's a check mark that says show more options. If you click on that, you will actually get everything that I've got, everything that you see on mine. What ends up happening is that when it opens up, this allows you to lower contrast. So in the shadow part that's at the very top, it's going to open the shadows up. In the highlight parts that is also right underneath it, what the highlights do, it's both of these are pushing things towards your midtones. So if you actually take the shadows and you crank them way up, you'll see it continues to lift those shadows. They're getting lighter and lighter and lighter. If you grab your highlights and start to crank this across, this starts to step on your highlights. So it's actually everything is getting pushed towards the middle. Now, I don't think this needs any highlight correction at all, but I do think it needs a pretty aggressive shadow lift on this. So I am not sticking around at the 35s. I'm going to actually pop this open up into, I'm up in the 60 range right here. Again, I'm looking at the edge of this tree right here. It might even go higher. I might actually get this up to 65. Now, this could change because I also think that the girl is slightly underexposed here as well. So when I lift the exposure of the girl, it's going to lift all the shadows as well. So it's kind of an iterative process, but this is sort of where I'm going to start. Again, I can't stress to you how important it is to use your preview buttons when you're doing this. Turn them on and off, because you're trying to get a sense of, is this, what I'm trying to do in this luminosity issue right here is I'm trying to make this look like a normal, believable black and white photograph. That's what this luminosity check layer is all about. And so for me, around that 60 looks pretty good to me. However, you can turn your luminosity, you can't turn your luminosity off. Go ahead and say okay to that. This now has created a smart filter. So because this was a smart object, I've got it as a smart filter. It means I can double click on that shadows and highlights and go right back into it. If I save this file and close it up, that filter does not go away. This all stays, and so I can go back and edit it again. So now I'm going to turn my luminosity off, and I'm just going to see how I feel about this. And to me, when I'm looking at the shadows on the trees, I'm looking at the shadows on the plants, whatever, this actually looks good to me. If you want a quick preview of this, what change we've made to turn it on and off, select the actual mask for the smart filter. If you turn off the eyeball for the smart filter, it has to reprocess that entire image to do it. If you actually, though, just invert the mask of the smart filter, it's just a turning on and off. It's not processor intensive, and it's really fast. So I just select the mask and invert it, Command I, and I can go back and forth and say, okay, this is feeling a little bit better to me, but I still feel like she's not getting hit as hard as, I mean, look at some of these, the flowers up in here. They're actually getting completely nuked out. I mean, there's, those highlights are getting hit really hard. And you can tell this light is coming over onto my scene because there's light on the sidewalk that's also not in the shadows. It's getting smacked pretty hard. And so I feel like I need to open her up a little bit more as well. I'm going to zoom into this girl's face. So again, we've talked about this trick before. These are all sorts of ways that you can actually check exposure in your images using, again, your numerical readouts. So what I'm looking for here is a highlight on her skin. I'm going to look at the highlight right on the top of her forehead. Again, you want to stay away from anything that would have a lot of makeup on it. So like all the sort of blush on the side of her cheek, I would stay away from that. But you could do the same trick possibly down on her neck, even possibly on her hand up in here. I'm looking for a highlight on this girl's skin. So that's what I'm going for in all of this. So make sure that you've selected the girl, and then I'm going to hover over that highlight right above her eyebrow. And you can see I've got a 240 that's reading in my red channel. Now, we have talked about this before. The ideal range for exposure, a highlight on a Caucasian skin in the red channel only would be 225 to 245. This is reading a 240 right now. I'm going to go ahead and throw a color sampler tool down on this guy. So I'm going to click on my color sampler tool. I'm going to drop it right on that highlight on her forehead. It actually puts this down as a 225. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit and make sure that I'm actually hitting that forehead, that highlight part. So yeah, I'm going to come down a little bit more in there. So now I'm reading a 236 on that. Again, because the plants are so blown out on all of this, I'm going to actually push this up to that 245 in the red channel limit. So again, a lot of people would do this using a curve on top of this. I'm not going to use a curve on top of this. Instead, I'm going to use another smart filter for this. So again, you can do multiple smart filters. I've already opened up my shadows and highlights. I'm now going to actually add the camera raw filter to this. So up to the filter, make sure you do have the girl selected, the composite body, up to the filter menu, down to camera raw filter. Now, when this opens up, it's in isolation. I can't see it. I can't really get a readout. I do have readouts here. I could go in and zip in on this girl's face and try to put a point down, a readout on that same highlight. However, when I opened up the shadows, that changed everything. So the filter that is doing the shadows, it is not present here inside of camera raw filter. So I'm just going to guess at this, and if it's wrong, then I'll go back and change it. I'm going to grab and I'm going to add a half a stop to this. It's going to be too much, but that's where I'm going to start. So just grab your exposure slider and drag it up to plus 0.5 and say okay. And then you can look at your readout, and you can see in my readout I'm 249. I hit this too hard. So I'm going to double click on the camera raw filter again to go back into it, and I'm going to drop this down, and instead of adding a half a stop, I'm going to add a quarter of a stop. So now I've got a plus 0.25, and I'll go back in here and I'm going to read this again, and it's reading right at 245. And so for me, this is actually how I'm going to start off in doing this part. Now, I don't like seeing that big readout on her face. I can't really tell if this image is working or not. So if you hit Command H, it hides all of your extras. So extras are things like guidelines, marching ants, color sampler tools. It's still there. If you hit Command H, it'll come right back. But this way I actually turn it off. And now I can zoom into my scene here, and I feel like, okay, look at how hot this whole area is back in here. It's beginning to match her a little bit better. I think that this part's actually working better for me. I think it is. So anyway, again, I'm going to invert my smart filter mask. So just select the smart filter mask, Command I to bring it back and forth. And so this is what I'm actually doing in here. And I actually feel like pretty good about that. Now, if you feel like that it's opening up her legs a little too much, I don't know that I really feel like that. I think it's doing a really good job on the upper half of her body. But if you feel like it's a little too strong on her legs, you can back that off. Again, I'm going to go to my tablet right now. I'll be working with my tablet the rest of class. So remember, this mask right here allows you to, control where these filters are actually applied. So I'm going to hit the B key to get a regular brush, hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white, hit the X key to get black as my foreground color. Then I'm going to click on my drop-down menu, and I'm going to change this to relatively soft brush, so around to 25%, a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and I'm going to drop my flow way down. I'm going to bring my flow down to like 4 or 5%, something like that. Yeah. And then with black as my foreground color, I'm only working on this smart filter mask. I'm just going to start scrubbing across her legs to bring back a little bit more tone in there. So because I feel like, again, the branches, I mean, all the flowers and that kind of stuff, they would be knocking part of this off. You can see she's sort of standing in shadows in that sort of like shadow area here and in here as well. It's this open area that I feel like needs to be hit harder. And so I feel like that part's actually pretty good in there. So that's where I'm going to keep it. I'm going to hit it a little bit harder down at her feet. Yeah. And that actually works, I think, a little bit better for me. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is take a look at color. So I'm going to go up to the very top of my check layers. I'm going to click to turn on the psychedelic color part of this. And what you can see in this is happening in here is there is a real heavy weight of green that's happening in my image here. And primarily in her face and her skin, there's a dominance of red in here. I need to balance that a little bit more, I think. So to do that, I'm going to come back down to my image now. Again, I've still selected my image. I'm still working on the girl. I'm going to then add a hue saturation layer. I'm a color balance layer on top of this. So come to your adjustment layers, click on it. They'll circle half black and half white. Click on it, it'll open up, and we are going to do a color balance. Where are you? Color balance. Before you do anything else, you need to change the blending mode of your color balance from normal all the way down to color, because all I want to change in here is the color. And then you need to clip this to the image, because right now, without it being clipped, if you do a change like this, you change your whole image. I don't want to change the whole image. I just want to change the girl. So to do that, you hover your cursor between this adjustment layer and the figure. Hold down your Option key, and your cursor will turn into a little box of marching ants with an arrow pointing counterclockwise. When you click on that, you will see that it pushes your entire color balance layer to the right, and then that little arrow that shows up is pointing down. That's your indication that this is being clipped to my image. So now if you actually do your color sliders and move them back and forth, the only thing that it impacts is the image. Is the girl. So in this case, I feel like I need to add a little bit of green in this. So I'm going to grab my green slider, and I'm going to start to push it slightly to the right. And I don't know that I'm that happy with it. I'm going to double click that to cancel that out. I'm going to try and see what happens if I just remove some of the red. So I'm going to grab the red cyan slider and push it a little bit in the opposite direction. And that's pulling in a little bit more green for me than, that's actually working a little bit better for me. I'm also going to bump the green up just a little bit. I'm going to stay away from the green. I think that's a little bit, that's gotten me spooked a little bit too much. So if you want the same thing that I've got right now, and it's just a guess, I've got a -22 in my red-green, my cyan red slider. To see what this then looks like, turn off your color check layers, and then come down into that color balance layer and turn the eyeball on and off. And you can see it's sucking some of that red out of her, and I think that that actually makes more sense. Look at the rest of my image. I don't really have any dominant red in my image. So this actually works a little bit better for me. Now, if you feel like this is too strong, you've got two choices. So let's say that you felt like this is too strong, or you want to see what it looks like to back it off a little bit. I've got a -22 right here. If you want to see what half of that looks like, it's a -11. So just drag it down to -11. And then again, use your Command Z to go back and forth. And I still personally feel like that I cleaned it out. The -22 is a better look for me. So that's the one I'm actually going to go with here. So then my next move is to check the saturation of this image. So to do that, you go to your saturation check layer and turn this guy on. And in the saturation check layer, her dress is saturated, and there's no getting around that. Even though we knocked back the saturation, a lot of the trees and the leaves and all of that kind of stuff, they're also still really saturated in this. I'm looking, so again, what the saturation layer shows you is anything in this check layer that is light is saturated. Anything that is dark is not saturated. So these areas that are black, whatever they are, they have no color in them at all. They are some tone of gray. So you can see the ground is not really all that saturated. So I feel like with her, she needs to actually, I think she's still slightly too saturated. I think I need to drop the saturation off of her slightly. So to do that, I'm going to click on this adjustment, the color balance adjustment layer, because I need to stack my adjustment layers on top of one another so that I can clip all of them to the figure. You cannot put anything in between these adjustment layers, or you lose the clipping part of it. You'll put in a space that doesn't allow the body to control where it's actually working on the image. So I am going to add another hue saturation layer on top of this. I'm going to immediately change the blending mode from normal down to saturation. And then finally, I'm going to hover between the hue saturation layer and the color balance layer that's right underneath it. Hold down your option key, and you will get that same little square box with the marching ants and the arrow pointing down. Click, and now that is also now clipped to my body, so that when I do radical saturation adjustments, it only impacts the body. It does not impact the rest of the image at all. So I'm just going to pull my saturation back off this a little bit. I don't typically hit these too hard, but I'm somewhere around a -15 if you want the same as mine. I'm not positive it's going to be where I stay, but it looks good right now. I'm going to turn off my saturation check layer, and then again, I'm going to use the eyeball to turn this on and off to suck some of that out. Now, I feel like that's gotten a little bit too pastel-y in there. It's pulled off, it's graying things out a little bit too much for me. So I'm going to back this off. I'm going to try a -10 in there instead, and then turn again my eyeball on and off again. That's still a little bit too much. I'm going to back it off to like a 7 or an 8. Yeah, and I'm feeling like that's actually beginning to work for me now better. So then I'm going to double click the hand and kick back out here again. Typically I will try after I've made these changes, I will try my luminosity check layer again just to make sure I'm still feeling good about that, and push this far back. I do still feel pretty good about this part. I think it's still working pretty well. I still feel like the legs are a little bit, possibly a little bit too light, but we'll deal with that one a little bit later. The last thing in the world, the last thing that I do want to do with this is that I need to mimic I need to build a shadow for her, because I've got all of this side light coming in. There is some shadow on the ground that's coming from all the flowers and stuff, but I need to build the one for her. So to do that, I'm going to go down to the background layer. I'm not going to do it on the background layer. I actually need to do, because if I do it just above the background layer, remember there's this hue saturation layer, adjustment layer above the background that's actually knocking my scene back a little bit. I need to do my shadows above that. So go ahead and click on that layer, and then we're going to add a blank layer on top of that. So again, I clicked on my hue saturation adjustment layer so that when I put the shadow layer on it, or added the shadow layer, it's going to be above that so that I'm not impacting my shadow with the hue saturation layer part. So I'm going to double click on that layer number 1, and I'm going to rename it shadow. And then I'm going to go up to the girl, and I'm going to hover over the thumbnail of the girl, hold down my command key, and click to load her as a selection. So it's just the marching ants of her. I'm going to come back down to my shadow layer right now, and I'm going to fill this with black. If your foreground and background colors are not defaulted, hit the D key first. Black is my background, is my foreground color, so Option Delete will actually fill that with black. Command D to deselect to get rid of the marching ants. And then if you turn off the eyeball for the figure, you'll see all you did was create a black silhouette of her on that shadow layer. That's what I'm going to use to build my shadow. So this control point that keeps showing up in here is driving me a little nuts, so I'm going to get rid of it. It's done its work. To get rid of it, select the color sampler tool, and then up at the very top in your options bar, there's a thing that says clear all. This will get rid of all of your color sampler points. So that guy's out of the out of my, not going to bother me anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to actually transform my shadow. I'm going to create it the way it actually needs to be. So to do this, you want to go to your pasteboard, because again, when you're working with shadows like this, we do pretty radical transforms to them, and a lot of times the handles for the transform box, the bounding box, goes outside of your image. So if you're on the pasteboard, you can actually reach it. So I'm going to hit the F key to get to the pasteboard. That's all I needed to do. And then I'm going to click on my shadow layer, and I'm going to transform it. Command T. So now when you transform this guy, if you were to just rotate it right now, you can see there's an anchor point right where her crotch is. If you hover your cursor outside of the bounding box, you'll get a double-headed arrow. That double-headed arrow indicates that you can rotate, but it always rotates around the anchor point. So if we rotate this thing, it's anchoring, it's going around that part in the middle of her body. I don't want to do that. Actually, what I want to do is, just to save myself steps, I want to anchor her feet. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to grab the anchor point, and I'm going to drop it right down to the very middle, right between her two shoes down at the very bottom. Now when I rotate this thing, it's actually doing more what I want it to do. Again, it's keeping it near her feet, which I want. And then I'm going to bring this thing down, and you can see, if you take a look at the shadows, the direction of the shadows that are actually happening, the real ones that are happening, this girl, it's side lit, but it's also slightly backlit. So this, you're not going to just pull this thing directly to the side. You're actually going to angle it down. I'm looking to try to match the angle of the shadows that are actually in the real life part of all of this. So I'm going to bring this down slightly like this, and then I'm going to zoom in. So you can see that this is going around the anchor point. It's not perfect right now. I'm going to move it a little bit. But first, I need to crush this shadow. If you think about this, what the shadow really is the side of the girl. I mean, it's not, you're not getting this full figure, the full frame with the dress and all that kind of stuff like that. Again, this is, the light is coming from the side. The shadow that you would see that's being created by this, instead of seeing the really flowy part of the dress, you would actually see like her boobs and her nose and those sorts of things that are coming forward and backward toward the camera and away from the camera. That's the profile of your, that would be the profile of your shadow, not something that is flat on like the front of this. However, we can cheat this a lot. So first thing I'm going to do is crush this shadow to not be so wide. To do that, I'm going to grab the control handle that's sitting right over on the very top of it now. It was the side, but now that I've rotated this, it is the top. But I want to crush this evenly. I don't want to simply bring the top down. I want to actually take both sides and squish them together. So to do that, hold down your Option key. And then when you click and push this together, both of them will squeeze together. And I'm actually going to hit this pretty hard. I'm going to get her pretty thin. I'm not really caring about her, the skirt in here, the shadow part. It's really more what I believe would actually be happening to her legs. So that may be a little too much. So I'm going to open this up a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to actually move this back in here so that it would be like it was really coming off of her. So I'm going to zoom in here because you want to make sure that the feet look right. Some of you guys, you've got to remember where the light is coming on this. You would never have any shadow that's actually happening on the right side of her feet that was being caused by her feet. You do have shadow here that's being caused by the flowers and the plants that are on the other side, but there is no way that her body could be causing a shadow on this side of her feet, as well as there would be nothing that would actually give you shadow in front of her feet. So again, you need to keep that. When you guys were doing contact shadows, a lot of the stuff that I graded, people were just doing these big discs that were underneath her feet, and there's nothing to explain that. Again, you need to think about how shadows are working in this. So I'm feeling relatively good about this, although I think it is still a little bit too wide. So again, I'm going to hold down my Option key, and I'm going to crush it down just a little bit more, and I'm going to leave it like that. And I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. So now I also have to look at her legs, and I can see that there is no way that there would be a space between her legs given the shadow that's happening. Her legs are basically, one is slightly in front of the other, but they're really almost on top of one another. That shadow would be solid, so I need to make it solid. So I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. You now want to make your brush completely hard because I just want to fill in the space in between the two legs. Make my brush a little bit smaller. Black is my foreground color, and I'm just going to paint this in. I don't see anything painting. It's because my flow is at 4%. Take your flow all the way back up again, and then just paint the line that's between her legs. Now, I also don't think that this shadow would go as far behind her as it is right now. So I need to get rid of some of that part that's still here in the back. I'm just going to do that using, you could do the pen tool, you can do the eraser tool. There's a gazillion tools that you can do to do this. I'm actually going to use the pen tool because I want to put a little curve and bend in there. So the P key to get the pen tool. I'm going to come off this part of her calf right here, and then I'm just going to come down in here and roll this back in like this, and then come back around. Go to my path palette, hover over this, Command click to load that as a selection, and then up to my select menu, down to modify, down to feather, and I'm going to hit it with a 1/2 pixel. I'm just taking a little bit of the edge off and say okay to that. And then on my shadow layer, just hit the delete key. It'll just get rid of it. Command D to deselect. So I've kept a little bit of the shape still in there, but it's more believable coming off of her feet because there would be nothing to explain that shadow going way back behind her any more than coming in front of her. So I'm going to double click on my hand and kick back out and say, do I believe that this is actually the way it probably should go? And I do. So then the next move that I'm going to make is I need to actually put in some motion. I need softness on the edge of this shadow. The thing is, though, remember, if you looked at the way we did compound shadows last week, when we were looking at them, the softness of the shadow is more extreme the further away you get from the body. The closer it is to her feet, the sharper they are. So I can use the Smart Filter mask to actually control where that sharpness of my shadow is and the softness of it is. So to do that, I need to turn this into a smart object. So at this stage of the game, with your shadow layer still selected, up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects and Convert to Smart Object. Take a look at my screen, Layer menu, Smart Object, Convert to Smart Object. This is now a Smart Object, so now I can run my motion filter on here. That's the one I typically use. So up to the Filter menu, down to Blur, down to Motion Blur. And again, I typically will do a blur across the shadow. So for me, that means that this little wheel that you're using right here would not be going 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, because that would actually be the bottom of the shadow and the top. Instead, I'm going to do it from noon to 6 o'clock. And so that's actually adding the softness on both sides of my shadow. Now I've got a distance of 13. It's too extreme. So I'm going to start to back this off. And I'm looking at the quality of the shadows that are around it. I'm looking at the real ones that are sitting back here. And when I get to a distance of around like a 3, it's very subtle, but it's getting very close to the edges of the shadows that are the real ones that are in my image. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. And then again, the trick that I'm going to use to actually make this, because this has now gotten soft everywhere. It's soft at her feet and it's soft at the top as well. I need that to gradually go from really sharp at her feet to really soft once you get out further away from her body. So to do that, click on your Smart Filter mask. Remember, this mask controls the filter. So again, if you invert this, Command I, you'll see that all the edges get sharp again. If you go back, all the edges are soft again. But if you grab your gradient tool, it's the tool in the very middle of your toolbar on the left-hand side, or just hit the G key, that is the gradient tool. Make sure that up in your options bar, it's set to Classic Gradient. So you have 2 versions, Gradient and Classic. Just use Classic for right now, it's simpler. Then in the box that's right to the right of that, this is where you can actually do the type of gradient. Click on the drop-down menu. There's a set of pre-canned gradients in here. We're going to open up the Basics panel, the Basic group, and select the one on the very left. It's just foreground to background. That's the one that we want to use. And then finally, for the type of gradient, in the 5 little icons that are sitting to the right of that, you're going to pick the one that's closest, the one that's the most to the right. To the left. It's the linear gradient. And then I'm going to come over here onto my, again, I'm working on my Smart Filter mask. I'm going to simply click right on the edge of her left foot, and I'm going to simply drag, and I'm going to go out about halfway and then just let go. And you'll see that it's actually made this whole area next to her feet sharper, but once I get out here to the further out edges, it's getting softer and softer and softer, which is pretty much what I want. Now, this is all great, but the truth of it is I'm doing all of this simply to build a mask to then create a curve that will allow me to create shadows the way they are truly created. The way a shadow is truly created is that whatever's casting the shadow is robbing that scene of light. In a curve, that means you are taking the highlights away. That's what you're doing. That's very different than simply dropping the opacity of this. If you take the opacity of this down, it kind of looks like it, but again, it's not it. Look at the color of my shadow right now compared to the real ones that are in the scene. That's not believable for me, so I'm not going to actually do that part. I'm going to crank my opacity all the way back up again. So I want to load this thing that I've made, my smart object. I want to load it as a selection. The problem is that if you hover over the shadow, just the shadow itself, and you do Command click, this is loaded, but this does not have the blur applied to it. The blur is a filter that's sitting down here, and you can see if you zoom in here really quickly, you can actually see part of the softness of the shadow is actually outside of the marching ants. So it's not this is going to be really sharp. This is going to be as if I had made the selection without that blur at all. I don't want that. That defeats the whole purpose. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect that. Instead, what you do is you turn this shadow into another smart object. These are called nested smart objects. But when I convert this to a smart object, it is going to then put the blur onto the shadow itself, and then I can use that to load it, and my mask will have the blur as a part of it. So to do that, simply click on the shadow layer that we've been working on and up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects and convert to Smart Object. So you can do this again, but now you'll see, you don't see the smart filter anymore because it's inside the smart object, but I still have the whole blur is actually still happening on this. So now when I command click this to load it as a selection, I get the blur. So just hover over it, command click. I've now got marching ants again. And now I'm going to add a layer, just a regular curve on top of this. So come down to the adjustment layers at the bottom of your menu, click on it, and come up, and we are going to add just a regular curve. And then you will see it's put a curve on here with a layer mask on it, and the shadow part is actually white, and the rest of the layer mask is dark, which is exactly what I want it to be. So then finally, I need to recreate this shadow so that it matches the shadows that already exist in my scene. To do that, I'm going to go back to my color sampler tool. So again, the eyedropper tool about a quarter of the way down and the filter on your tool bar. So again, the eyedropper, come down to color sampler tool. I'm going to drop a color sampler point pretty much right in the middle of her shin area, right in there. And then I'm going to turn off this shadow smart object that made all of this. Now you can see I don't have anything, there's no shadow in this area here. I'm a little worried about this one sort of shadow area. I'm close to it. I'm going to actually scooch this out just a little bit. It's still going to be underneath where my shadow should be, but I'm looking for an area that doesn't have any sort of texture in it already. I'm just looking for an area that would be in bright sunlight. So that's my first point that I'm going to put down, and then I'm going to actually add another point, and I'm going to go to the shadow that's back behind it. And again, I'm staying away from this area that's sort of like underneath the plants on the left-hand side. I'm going to go to something that would really be, again, right in the full sunlight. So this area that I'm looking at here, just look at my screen really quickly to see where I'm talking about. This area seems to be very similar to the area that I'm going to try to turn into my shadow now. So I'm going to put a color sampler point back there. So then you can see I've got my curve is actually selected. So I'm going to select on the property part of the curve so that I can control that. I'm not, my mask is fine. It's exactly where I need it to be and what I need it to be. So I'm going to actually work on this part now. So you can see then in your info palette readout that in your point number 1, mine is reading a 253, 254. It's very, very, very hot, very bright. It's blown out actually. And then right next to it are the real numbers for the real shadow. The real shadow's in the sort of like the 169 is the highest value of this. So I'm going to grab the white point, the top white point of my curve, the full RGB part, because you might as well pull all of it down till you get close to this mid-range that I've got in here. My highest number in here is a 169, so I'm going to yank this curve down until I get a red value here of 169. So I'm simply going to click on this and pull it down. I'm watching my my readout on my point number 1, and you get close to this, but I can't quite get there. I keep going back and forth between 68 and 70. If you just let go of your cursor and use your arrow keys, your up and down arrow keys, you can tap in just single segments of it or single elements of it. So I got to a 169 on my red channel. However, I need to then continue to adjust my green and blue. You can see my my green level on this is a 170. It should be a 165. So I'm going to click on my drop-down menu in my layers palette, come down to the green channel, grab the white point slider of that and pull it down until I get a 165 in my green. So now, again, my point number 1, those greens are matching the thing that I'm making and the real one. And then finally, a 167, the yellow part of this, my blue channel, needs to go all the way down to 128. So I'm going to go to my blue channel, grab the white point slider, and start to kick it down until I get down to 128. So now what I've got is the after numbers of my point number 1, which is the shadow I'm trying to create, have actually matched the real shadow points that are sitting back behind it. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out of here. So that's actually looking pretty convincing to me. However, what's not convincing about this is that that coloring is actually landing on all of these plants. And it would not be on top of these plants. It would actually be underneath that. So I need to make a quick selection of these green plants that are in here to actually mask this out. The problem that I have though is that this shadow, I can't change the mask of this that's controlling this curve. I actually need to have another mask influence this, because if I make this as a selection right here and go in and actually try to add it to this curve, it's gonna get complicated. So what we need to think about is, how do you nest masking? And the way you do it is this. So with your curve layer selected, I'm going to double click on it first off, and I'm going to name it. So this is Final Shadow, or Shadow Final. We're going to put a group above this. So if you click on the little icon at the bottom of your layers palette that looks like a folder, click on that. This is a group. It's called group number 1. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm also going to call it Final Shadow. And then click on this curve, and you want to drag it up and drop it onto the group so that it goes inside of the group. And now if you turn the group off to make sure it's in there, you can collapse the group and you'll see it disappears, but it's actually in there. And also if you turn the eyeball for the group off, you'll see that it disappears again. And you can see the problem that I've got. It's this whole area that's actually in here. That's the issue that I've got with this. So now what I'm going to do is I need to make a selection of all the green leaves that are in here. So to do that, go back to your background layer and make it active, because again, you need to be on the layer that actually has the content that you want your quick selection tool to find. So with the background layer selected, I'm going to go to my quick selection tool, and I'm simply going to come down here, and I'm going to try to select all the I don't want to select any of the concrete walkway. I just want to select all the green. So I'm just going to start clicking on this stuff. Make your brush smaller. And you don't need to be crazed about this. This shadow isn't as offensive as it possibly could be. So I'm just going to select through all of this part. And then once you get back into here, into the woods, back in this part, you don't need to worry about any of that part. There would be no shadow back in there. But there are little areas in here where I'm still seeing sidewalk. So I'm holding down my Option key. I'm going to clean those out just a little bit. And up into here just a little bit, just to make it a little bit more organic. You don't need to be too crazy about it. So I've got a decent selection going. It's covering pretty much everything that I want to be covered as far as what I think the shadow is spilling on. And then so coming up to the Final Shadow group, we are going to then add a layer mask to the group. This is how you do nested masking. I don't want to touch the mask that is controlling the curve, but I do want to control where that result all is. So if I simply click on the final group, the Final Shadow group, and add that as a layer mask, what you'll see is it got rid of all of the shadow, and it's only letting it be in the bad place. So it just means I need to invert my shadow. Invert my mask. Command I to invert it. And now what you'll see is if you turn this on and off, it's only hitting the area of the sidewalk. Now it's still hitting a lot further back into the woods, in the flowers. I'm going to clean that. You can just clean that up with a hammer. So it's all of this stuff back in here. I just was using that to make sure that it was correct on the sidewalk part. And it is correct on the sidewalk part. So now I'm going to back out of my image. And again, still working on the layer mask. Grab the B key to get a brush. Make it a really big brush. Make sure that it is a completely hard brush. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Black is my foreground color. And just paint away the rest of the mask, the rest of the shadow that's hitting back into the woods. So again, I've got these two annoying points that are on here that I need to actually get rid of. So to do that, I'm going to, my color sampler points, click on the color sampler tool again and hit clear all. I'm dialing this guy in. It's actually looking pretty good for me right now. So I feel like the shadow part in here is working. I like the way this part actually looks. A couple of things to think about this though. If you look at the real shadows in here, if you come down at the real shadows where stuff is actually hitting them, in some of these cases you actually see a little bit more like highlights on the rocks. The rocks are a little bit shinier than the area that's down next to it. So if you want to bring a little bit more of that part of it out, we can actually use a blending mode to do that. So if you go back into your final shadow group and you click on the curve that's actually doing this thing, remember this is the curve that's actually doing my shadow work here. If you go all the way to the right of the curve and you double click, you will open up the layer blend if dialog box. What this dialog box does is it allows you to change the relationship between the layer that you're working on and the layer that's underneath. So for me, I want some of the I think I do. I may do this and I may hate the way it looks. So, but again, this is just my guess. I want to bring back some of the highlights on the rocks. It looks like it's just hammered this thing. So I want to bring back a little bit of that part of it. To do that, you can actually use this blend if. What the blend if does is that it's at the very bottom. It will allow you, right now, you can see that you have control points on both extremes. So you've got a control point on the current layer that's from 0 all the way up to 255, and the same thing that's on the bottom. Everything that is between these two sliders will be impacted by the setup that we have. However, if you narrow that range, the range that you narrow goes outside of that. And what I mean by that, it's the easiest to see is this way. We're going to grab the underlying layer slider, the one that's at the white point, and if you grab it and you start to drag towards the middle, you see that it starts to basically eat away at that shadow so that all of the highlights that were in there start to come back again. Now, in this case, when I'm looking at this, and I just realized that I was remembering that, when I do that, I run into this problem of the whole background, the area where I was placing that shadow is by and large all white background. It's all blown out anyway. It's not, I was hoping to get it on the rocks, but this is actually hitting it too far in the background. However, what you'll also notice is it looks really hyperpixelated. The reason it looks so pixelated is that this slider that we're working with right here, the slider is a cutoff. It's a hard cutoff. It's saying right now, so I've pulled it back to a 210. It's saying anything that's brighter than 210 is not going to be impacted by that curve. You'll see that there's actually two triangles that are put together. You can pull these things apart to get a much more gradual version of what I'm trying to do here. So to do that, you hold down your Option key, and when you click now on one side of the triangle, you can pull them apart. I'm going to take the right part of this triangle and pull it all the way back up to 255, and then I'm going to grab the other one. You can let go of the Option handle now once they're pulled apart, and you can control this now to actually bring stuff back in to control where this thing is pulling apart and where it is not pulling apart. Now, in my opinion, to be honest with you, this is actually not doing anything for me. Again, if you use your preview to turn it on and off again, it's pretty much ruining the whole thing that I was actually trying to make. So this is not working for me. Even if I pull this back, I get too much pixelation in here. So I'm going to hit cancel out of here and simply accept what I've got. Finally, I'm going to double click the hand. I still think that the area that's underneath her legs would be a little bit darker in here. So I'm going to go back to my smart filter. If you hold down your Option key, the smart filter for the camera raw and the highlights in the, so again, the whole lightning smart filters that we're doing on the body. If you hold down your Option key and click on this, you'll actually see it. It's not that dark. If I can continue to hit this a little bit harder to make them to remove that opening up effect on them a little bit more, which is what I'm going to do. So again, hold down your simply click on hold down your Option key again. Click on the smart filter. I'm going to go to my tablet. Hit the B key to get a brush. Make the flow of your brush really low, crank it down to like a 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity. I'm going to go ahead and make this a completely soft brush. And then I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit, and I'm going to continue to, again, black is my foreground color, working on the smart filter to just bring these legs down and the shoes down a little bit more. And that feels a little bit better to me. It's a little bit more sunken underneath there. And then finally, the last thing that I don't have in here are the contact shadows. So this is the last thing we'll do, guys, and I swear we'll take a break. So to do the contact shadows that fall right underneath her feet, go back to your shadow layer, my final shadow layer. I'm going to collapse that whole guy. I'm simply going to put, again, your shadows need to go on top of your backgrounds, but underneath your figure. So I'm just going to click on the final shadow that's going to the side to add my new shadows, the contact shadows, right above them. So to do that, I'm going to click on a blank layer. I'm going to double click on this and call it Shadow Contact. What contact shadow means, it's actually where you've got something that's literally making contact with another surface. So they're extremely sharp shadows and they are extremely dark, but they do not travel further out away from the shoes or anything else. So to do this, again, it's with a gradient. So the G key to make a gradient, make sure black is your foreground color. And then up in the top in your options bar, you do want to make sure that gradients are the classic gradient is selected, but now the type of gradient we use is not foreground to background color. Click on the drop-down menu that is the one that's just to the right of the thing that says classic gradient. Open up the basics again, and in this case you want to pick the one in the middle, the one that goes from foreground color to transparent. And then finally, you do not want linear gradients here, you want circular gradients here. So you go to the 5 little icons that are to the right of that, and you're picking the second from the left. That is a radial gradient. So it starts as a circle that's very strongly black in the middle, and it fades out to nothing. So anyway, that's where I'm going to do this. I'm going to click and then just back out of my image right now. I'm just going to click and pull down a gradient. It makes a circle that, again, it goes from foreground to transparent. I'm going to transform this, Command T. It brings up the transform bounding box. Hold down your Option key and grab the top control handle. Remember, if you add the Option key, it not only will do the top handle, but it also connect it to the bottom handle. So you'll flatten it as a pancake, which is what I want to do. So click on this and drag it down to flatten it. Then I'm going to keep this pretty wide here because, again, it's falling off. I want the circle that's in the middle to actually be really strong right underneath her shoes. So in this case, mine is, and I'm going to put it right underneath her right shoe. I'm going to zoom in on this. I think it's pretty much in the right spot. Again, the anchor point that's of the shadow would actually be right in the middle of her foot if you want it to be balanced like that, and I want mine to be balanced like that. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this, and then immediately hit the E key to get your eraser tool. In the eraser tool, I'm going to crank my flow up to around a 30%. Again, you want it to be a brush. In my case, a medium hardness brush. You want a little control of it, but not a completely hard, perfect edge on this. 100% opacity, again, a 30% flow on this. Back to my tablet again, and I'm simply going to come down on this area, make my brush a little bit smaller. And again, there is nothing that would explain this contact shadow going to the left or to the right of her. So I'm going to clean it completely out. And then also there's nothing that will bring it right in front of her. So I'm going to knock that line back. So this is my first contact shadow. You can see it's bleeding over underneath the other foot. That would also not happen. So I'm going to clean it out underneath the other foot as well. And so I've got one contact shadow that's about right. There will be a shadow that goes actually between her feet because her right foot will actually cast a shadow underneath there. Her feet are right next to each other. It's going to be really dark underneath that. However, I've actually got the shape of the one that I want. Turn the shadow on and off and make sure that you're not getting weird shit out to either side of it or in front of your image. I don't have that happening. And so then you can just, because her feet are right next to each other, the contact shadow should be essentially the same. I'm just going to duplicate this layer. Command J, we'll make a copy of it. Hit the V key to get the move tool, and then just bring the other contact shadow underneath her other foot. And also, I think it needs to go up a little bit. Yeah, so I'm just use the my up arrow to pop it up 1 pixel, and then I can turn this one on and off again. And I like the way that those guys are looking. So in our scenario right now, this is the way that I'm actually going to play it out. Looking at this image again right now, I feel like the light on her face is a little too light. So I am going to go back and I'm going to kill the camera raw filter on her. The only thing I did with the camera raw filter was to make her face lighter. I'm just going to turn the eyeball of that off and see if I don't like this better now that I've been living with this image for an hour. And you can turn it on and off again just to see whether you think, how you feel about it, how you think it really looks. Actually feel much better about this turned off. It looks more believable and natural for me. So at this stage of the game, I'm going to do another history snapshot of this. So go to your history, click on snapshot, say okay, run up to the very top, and then click on the very set that we opened with this with. So with the composite done.psd was what this image looked like in the beginning. Click on that, and then come down to your snapshot number 1. And then go back and click on that, and then come back to number 1. Questions about any of this? Okay, let's call this 357. Guys, make it I'm going to give, we'll go over just a little bit. Do me a favor, make it a hard 13 and be back at 410. I want to do another one of these composites and talk about size and scaling for you, but anyway. And the sign-in sheet went around, make sure you got on it. This up again. The image that you have open now, you can close that one up. You don't need to save that guy. To get to back to the stoplights to be able to close this up, hit your F key again to go to the black pasteboard. F key one more time to get back to the little stoplight thing, and you can close this up. So the next one that I want to go after is Rahima's. So I'm going to again pull this down into try that again. Yeah. So if you guys can download that image for me, this one won't take quite as long as the last one. All right, so does everybody have this guy? Okay, I want to do the same thing again. I want to get rid of all of the controls. Again, because we've got a copy of it right here, so we can do the before and after comparison. So again, all I want you to have left is, you can even get, I think her shadows are actually pretty good. You can keep this, let's build shadows as well. Let's go through the whole thing again. So get rid of everything except for the background and the figure. So figure and background. So the first thing we're going to do here is I'm going to turn the figure off just for a second. I'm going to make a copy of my background. So this is a way you also need to start thinking about doing your compositing. And a couple of examples that I've got, and we may take a look at those depending on how long it takes us to do this one. Some of the people didn't really develop their backgrounds in the way that they should have. So again, just remember that when we're putting these composites together, you want to neutralize, you want to have everything, you want your background white balanced and your figure white balanced so that they go together. Then if you want everything to be warmer or everything to be cooler, or you want to introduce vignettes, or you want to color grade, or you want to do all of that, it does the entire thing. But again, if you have a background that is not white balanced and a figure that is, the color will always be off. You will never get those to go together. So you want to make sure that you're doing those sorts of things. Also, you want to make sure that your exposure is correct, that you've gone in and you've actually really adjusted the background, because the exposures that we're dealing with in the figures should actually be perfect exposures. You want that for your backgrounds as well. So I'm just saying, don't think that the background that you're given or the one that you shoot, or that's the end of it. You can actually do things with it. Now, in this case, I don't think there's really anything to do with this one. This was actually pretty, it looks fine to me in terms of all of that. You can see though what Photoshop thinks, and a lot of times I will do this. So really quickly, we're just gonna make a copy of this background layer, Command J, and we're gonna turn that into a smart object. Up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and then convert to smart object. You also can do this, just so that you know this. The reason I'm doing this is that I want to use Camera Raw filter on this, because it's not a raw file, so I can't go into conventional Camera Raw with it. So you can also go up to your filter menu, and you'll see in your filter menu there's a drop down also that says convert for smart filters. All that does is turn this thing into a smart object. You'll see when you do it, it actually gives you that little icon in the lower part. It is now a smart object. Then up to the filter menu and down to Camera Raw Filter. And when Camera Raw Filters opens up, the first thing that I always do is I just click the auto button and just see this is what Photoshop thinks I should do. So Photoshop thinks I should make this thing actually lighter. If you click on auto again, it goes away. I don't think I should make this lighter. I actually like the richness of it, and I like the depth of the shadows, and so I'm not going to do that. Now, also, if I could find something in here that I felt was a true neutral color, I would check the white balance of this. I don't really see anything in here. Some people would say, oh, well, you can use the highlight on the pillow. You can't really use the highlight on the pillow. That will actually be tinted with some red in it. You can't really use the gold. That'll actually be tinted with some yellow in it. There's nothing really in here for me to white balance on. So I'm not gonna, again, I think the image looks fine the way it is. I'm just trying to point this out to you. We'll look at maybe, again, if we have time, another image or two. Yes?
I'm just making sure I'm not tweaking, but in order to pull up the Camera Raw, don't you just double click the little icon on the thumbnail on the layers?
No. So I'm gonna hit, yes, we can dismiss all the changes here. So you don't double click on this at all. I just turned this into a smart object. If you double click on it, it's just going to actually show you the image inside the envelope. That's not what you do. To do Camera Raw on this, because this is not a raw file. If this was a raw file, you would double click on this. You would not be using the Camera Raw filter. You would be using Camera Raw. Two different things. The Camera Raw filter is control-like of Camera Raw, but again, this isn't a raw file, so Camera Raw processes raw files. This is not a raw file, so that's why we have to go the filter route. So again, you turn it into a smart object only because it will still function that way. If I do make a change in the Camera Raw filter, so let's say that I do actually open it up and say okay to that, it's still now a smart filter down here so that I can double click on it and go back into it and undo those sorts of things. Make sense? All right, but in this case, I don't need to do that, so I'm going to throw the whole thing away because I don't need to do that part here. But just remember that you guys should be considering that part. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my figure back on. Now this figure doesn't have anything that's actually been done to it. It's actually the original figure in this. So the first thing I want to do though is scale this. So to scale this, this is what you do. You look for something in here that would be a known height. And the known height in here is the height of the couch, not the back of the couch, but the seated part of the couch. There are really standard measurements for that. So I'm going to go online. I'm going to do a new page, and I'm going to go, what is the standard height? Standard, S-T-N-D-A-R-D, height of a chair in the US. And it'll come back to you and it'll say the standard height for a chair in the USA is 18 to 20 inches. So I'm going to go, okay, 18 to 20 inches. Now, when I look at the couch on this, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so that's going to be the height. I'm just looking for a pen to write on really quickly. So I need to write down numbers. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my image now. I'm going to turn off the figure, and I'm going to actually measure how high this, the level of this seat really is. And again, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, you know, this isn't like a stool or a high chair or something would be. It's not a director's chair. It's not that kind of chair, whatever. So I'm going to go with that 18 to 20. I'm going to just split the difference. I'm going to make this thing 19. I'm going to measure this and treat it as if it was 19 inches tall. So to do this, you need to have your ruler showing. So if you don't have your ruler showing, click on your view menu and come down and just put a check mark right next to rulers and they will show. Then we need this to be in pixels. You do not want this to be in inches or centimeters or anything else. So if you hover over the ruler itself, hold down your control key and click, you'll get a drop-down menu. If you're on Windows, it's just a right click, or if you're on Mac and you're on a tablet, you can do a two-finger swipe. You will get all of them are right clicks. You can change this to pixels. It makes the math that we're going to do in this the easiest. So I'm going to say okay to that. And then I'm going to pull two guidelines out. I'm going to pull one out, and I'm going to bring it down to the very foot of where the feet of the couch are actually laying on the floor. And then I'm going to pull a second one down. And the second one down gets a little trickier. But what you're looking for is you want to drop it right on the front edge of the couch, because again, the front edge of the couch is right over the top of this. Of the feet of the couch. So this will give me a legitimate height of the couch that's in here. So that's basically what I'm looking for in this part. So everybody have their guidelines down. All right, we need to measure the distance of that. And to do that, you come to your eyedropper tool. So again, over in the toolbar, quarter of the way down, click on this. You can come down to the ruler tool. You want to click on the ruler tool, and then come over to your image. Now, because we've got guidelines down, the ruler will actually snap to these guidelines if you're really close. So I'm going to get really close to the guideline that's on the bottom. I'm going to click and drag up. Now, as you're dragging up, you can go any angle, right or left of that. I want a straight line up. I want to know exactly what the height of the couch is. So hold down your shift key and it will restrict it to only going up and down or directly left and right. And I'm going to come up until it actually snaps to the other guideline that's sitting up at the very top. So now that I've gotten my ruler measured, you can see in your info palette, it's the height here is a negative number. The reason it's negative is because I started at the bottom and went up. If I'd started at the top guideline and gone down, it would give you the same number, but it would be a positive number. You don't care about what the negative or positive is here. You just care about the height. And you can see it's 208 pixels. You should have something close to that. If yours is 210 or 24, you're fine here again. But so I'm going to write that number down. So the height of my couch is 208 pixels. And that the equivalent of that in inches is 19 inches. I really hope that that's somebody moving something up on the floor above us and not like the tornado that just took the roof of the building off or something. Anyway. Okay. So then I need to turn the girl on as well. Now I want to scale her so that she actually fits this couch correctly. So, but right now she's actually forward of the couch. She's standing much closer to the camera. She's in front of this. She's not actually really at the level of the couch where she would be ready to sit down. That part doesn't matter. Hit the V key to get the move tool, select the girl, and we're simply going to lift her up until she actually touches that bottom guideline. You can even use your arrow keys to tap her up just a little bit so that she's up at the very top. So then the girl, you need to then imagine how tall she is. She is a professional model that puts, again, these are averages, but it will be very close. She'll average model for her, something like this. My guess is 5'10". She's also in a 3-inch heel. That makes her 5'10". That takes her to 6'1". 6'1" in inches is 73 inches, right? 6 feet is 72 inches. She's one more on top of that. So I'm going to make the girl 73 inches tall. That's how I'm going to set this up. So then this is how you actually figure this out in terms of pixels. You don't need to do this, just watch me. This is not a math class, but again, this is the way you use this all the time to set scale. So if you don't understand this part right now, take out a notepad, write this down really quickly. It works the same way every single time. So again, I'm just going to do a new image here really quickly to give me just a scratch pad to work on. So that part is fine. I gotta make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So this is how you do the math of this. It's called cross multiplying, and you'll see why. Give me 1 second. Let me just get my tablet going. A brush, completely hard brush. All the way flow up, really small brush. Okay, so this is how you do it. So we had 19 inches. That's the height of the couch. And that's over 73 inches. That's the height of the girl. Then we have equals, and then another line here. The 19 inches was 208 pixels. And so I'm trying to figure out what this is right here. To get this information, you do what's called cross multiplying. So we're going to multiply 73 times 208 and divide it by 19, and that will give me this value right here. So my math is 73 times 208. Again, that's what the cross multiplying is about. You cross, you go, it's not just a cross, but it's diagonal. Times 208 divided by 19, and that will equal my missing value right here. So if I go to my calculator and clear it out, so I did 73 times 208 divided by 19 equals 799 pixels. That's how tall the girl should actually be. So I'm going to write that down on my little pad of paper. 799 pixels is how tall she should be. I'm going to go back then to my image. I can get rid of this. I don't need to save it. I've done all the math. So again, this is my line right down here at her feet. It's the same. So she's scaled now exactly the same as the couch because I've pushed her against the couch. She's right against it from the same mark here. So I'm going to grab my ruler again, and I'm going to click on the bottom again, and I'm going to drag up holding down my shift key again, and I'm looking at the readout in my panel, in my info panel, and I want to get this to 799. And it's right there. So I'm going to let go at 799, and then I'm going to pull a guide down for it. So simply drag a line down and it will snap again to that. That's how tall this girl needs to be relative to this couch. Is this making sense? Yes? No? I feel like I've lost everybody. I know that's not true. Who have I lost? So again, I'm trying to scale this girl. If this couch is 19 inches tall and she's 73 inches tall, this is how it should scale. Right now, she is too short for this, which makes her even worse in terms of where she was before because she was actually closer to the camera before. She's going to be even bigger still when we actually scale this in perspective. So I need to make the girl taller. Again, she is not a smart object right now. I'm going to make her a smart object right now. So with the girl selected, come up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object, and then we're going to scale her. Again, smart objects are non-destructive. We want that. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Now in this case, I don't want her to, if we scale her right now, her head will actually move towards the top of my image and her feet will move towards the bottom of my image. I don't want that. I only want her to grow taller. I want to keep her feet where they are. So I'm going to click on my anchor point and drag it down and put it right at the bottom between her feet. Now her feet are anchored there, so all of the scaling that I do will be up to the top. So I'm going to click on the link between the width and the height in my options bar, because again, I want her to keep the ratio. I want her width and her height to still stay, you know, the ratio equal to each other so that I don't distort her. And then finally, I'm just going to hover over the height, the H or the W, either one, to get the scrubby slider, and click and drag until I take her up to the top. Not her hair is not going to be the top of it. It's the top of her head, the top of her forehead. This is now, she is now in perspective. She is now scaled to this couch. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark for that. My guidelines have done everything they need to do. I don't need any more guidelines here anymore. I don't need any of that part. I can change where she is now in perspective. I'm fine to do that. So I'm going to get rid of these guidelines. To do that, come up to the View menu and come down to Guides and then Clear Guides. They're gone. I don't need this ruler anymore, but the minute you click out of it, it will go away. However, I do need to scale her in perspective because the original comp had her pulled forward in front of the couch. To do that, hit Command T to transform her again. I am going to leave this anchor point right where it is. There's no way for me, I can actually figure out where the horizon line is of the room based on the lines that are in the parquet floor. Those would actually get, here, I'll show you how to do that. So just so that we know, I'm gonna hit the circle and say, with a line through it to temporarily stop the transform. I'm going to turn off the girl. If I really wanted to find out where the horizon line of the room is, I have to believe that these lines, these horizontal cut lines, are somewhat anchored in perspective to this image. So I would hit the F key to go to my pasteboard, hit the P key to get the pen tool. Then I'm just going to click on this one line that's here to the end. I'm going to drag my point, my pen tool all the way to the other side, and then you bring this back and forth so that it runs right along that line of parquet floor. Click to make a point, and then I'm going to come back around all the way back in here, and I'm going to click on this other outside line to do the same thing. I'm going to click on that to go back, and then again move it back and forth until you actually get exactly where it was supposed to be. And where these two intersect right here, that is the horizon line of your image, is right there. So now that I know where that is, I can get rid of my path tool. You can throw it away. It's done all its work. I was just finding converging lines. That's all I was doing. I'm going to turn on this layer again, turn her on again, Command T again with this. Now you can see in her case, this anchor point is a little bit low, so I'm going to actually hope that she's scaled the same. I'm going to drag and put my anchor point right on the very top of the horizon line so that I can scale her in perspective. Then hold down your Shift key and your Option key and grab the lower, either of the lower control handles on this, and simply pull out to where she is, where you think she should be. And in this case, this is roughly, I think, where the original figure ultimately was. So that's how I'm going to actually set this part up. And again, hit the check mark to say okay to that. Now, if you want to see the difference in where this was compared to the original, if you actually click on this to do a snapshot of it in history, you can go back and look at the very top, and you can see that the original girl was probably, I don't know, 4'3". This is why your comps suck. So I'm going to click back on the snapshot again. This is oriented correctly to the light. However, I don't think that this is in any way got enough contrast. Look at how contrasty the light is down on this. I mean, it's contrasty. I'm gonna hit the V key to get rid of my guideline. You can go up and do view clear guides, or hit the V key, hover over your guideline, and just drag it back up to the ruler. Either way, it'll get rid of it. But this girl needs more contrast. There's simply no question about that part. So to build more contrast in her, I'm actually going to, there's a number of ways that we can do this. I'm going to do it using a curve on this. So I'm going to click on this add adjustment layer. I'm going to bring this up. This is before I even run my check layers on this. I'm going to bring up a curve. I'm going to change the blending mode of this curve to luminosity. You only want to impact the tone, not the color. I'm going to clip this to the girl by hovering over the line between the two of them. Hold down my option key and click to clip it. And then I'm going to just pull in some contrast. I'm going to drop my shadows down a little bit more, and I'm going to push up my highlights just a little bit as well. I'm going to kick my shadows down even a little bit more, make them a little bit darker. Again, I'm looking at how dark this area is in here, and I'm looking to get that same sort of darkness on her face here. So I'm going to pull that down even a little bit more. And that's feeling a little bit better now. And then I am going to run my check layers on top of this. So again, to do that, come over to your actions palette. Your top layer, the curve that we're working on right now, is the top one, so all my check layers will go above it. And I'm going to simply click and run my check layers. It gives me my color to begin with. I'm going to go to the top and turn the color off and start with just my luminosity layer. And then you can see in here with my luminosity layer, when I'm looking at her, she looks a little bit too light in this scene for me. Not too much, but a little bit too light in here. So again, I don't use these curves to actually do light and dark. And if I'm going to make it lighter or darker, or whatever, typically I will do this using the camera raw filter. She is a smart object, so the camera raw filter will work on this non-destructively. Up to the filter menu, down to camera raw filter, and I'm just going to drop my exposure down 1/3 of a stop and say okay. Then I'm going to invert my mask just to turn it back on and off. I think that 1/3 is too much. I'm going to open that up again. Just double click on camera raw, open it up, and I'm going to take it to 1/4 instead of 1/3. And say okay to that. And that feels better to me. Again, just inverting my mask on here to turn it on and off. Yeah, I think that part's actually looking better for me right now. So I'm going to turn off of my luminosity check layer and say, okay, yeah, this actually is feeling better for me in here. So then I'm going to go to my color check layer. So up at the very top, click on color check layers. It'll turn on both of those. Now in this case, she's actually really close to this already. I mean, her dress is yellow, so it's never going to actually be in the same color group as the rest of these. But look at how closely her face is to the whole rest of this room. The colors in this are actually really pretty solid in here. So I don't think I really need to make any adjustment in my color check layers at all. Again, when I turn this off, she doesn't have that really red ruddiness in this. There's a little bit of red tone in here that would make it fits in with the rest of the part. So I'm actually liking this part pretty well. And then I'm going to try my saturation check layer again. And you can see here in the saturation part here, obviously the couch and the back wall are extremely saturated. But if you look at the floor and all the kind of stuff around this, that's nowhere near as saturated. So I'm going to knock a little bit off of this, not too much. So to do that, I'm going to select the curve that's actually creating my contrast in here, that it's just affecting the girl. I'm going to add a hue saturation layer to this. Again, I'm going to immediately change the blending mode of my hue saturation layer down to saturation only. I'm going to then clip it, holding down my option key to clip it so that it only impacts the girl and not anything else. And then I'm just going to drop my saturation slightly down. And probably somewhere 810, somewhere right in there is looking about right. Uncheck my saturation layer and then actually turn this hue on and off. Yeah, and I'm liking the way that actually looks. And then I would do the same thing for shadows for her. I would do her contact shadows, and I would do the other shadow out to the side, but we've only got 9 minutes to do that, and so that's not going to happen. So I do want to see, though, how this looks relative to the initial one. So I am going to snapshot this as my snapshot number 2, and then go up to the very top and look at the way it was originally in the beginning, and look at where we are right now. Is this making sense? It's just those steps, 1, 2, 3. It's always the same thing. The compositing part will always be the same thing. The shadows that we build here would be exactly the way we built them for the last one. Although instead of using remember the last one, she was out in the daylight. It was a much warmer situation. This is more of like a north light kind of situation. This is not direct light coming in, so it's probably a little bit bluer as well, whatever. So things are different. The color of the shadows would be different. I would base the color of the shadow that I did to the side of her just based on the color of the shadow that's actually underneath the couch. And we're off to the races. All right, questions about any of this? The last thing I will say about this that we haven't talked in this class about, and we will look at more extreme examples of depth of field next week. Right now, everything is sharp. The girl is sharp, and the couch behind her is sharp, and the wall behind that is also sharp. That would not be the case. Depth of field would insist that if she's sharp, that the background is actually fading off a little bit more. So the cheap, easiest, down and dirty way to do this is to then make a duplicate of your background layer, Command J, turn that into a smart object so that we can use smart filters on it. So again, I can do it just by clicking on filter and say convert for smart filters. And then this background needs to be a little bit softer. However, the area that's right by her feet does not need to be softer, but the area in front of it needs to be softer. Remember how depth of field works. The front would be soft, the area right under her would be sharp, and then the background would be a little bit softer as well. So to do that, I'm going to do a really extreme blur on this so that we can find out where her feet really need to be, where it needs to be sharp. So come up to your filter menu, come down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and hit this pretty hard. We're going to overdo this, but it'll just give us a way to actually see it. So I'm going to hit this with like 8 pixel sharpness and say okay to that. Now remember, we have a filter mask in here that will actually allow me to control where the blur happens and where it doesn't happen. So to do this, I'm going to do this with what they call a reflected gradient. So hit the G key. It'll be the last thing we do, guys, and we will get it done in 5 minutes. Hit the G key to get a gradient tool. Make sure it is the classic gradient. Click on your drop-down menu here to pick the type of gradient. We want to do this foreground to background color. Again, black to white, which is our foreground and background colors. But now in terms of the type of gradient, it's the 4th one over. So you come over the type of gradient. Remember, linear is the first one, radial is the second one. Nobody knows what the third one name is. The next one is what they call a reflected gradient. If you click on that, and then again, your foreground colors are black and white, come over and click on the layer mask for this filter, and then come right down by her feet and click and drag out and let go. And you'll see that what it does is if you hold down your Option key and look at your gradient, it puts in this small little line that then fades off to white on the front side and white on the back side. That's actually giving me, that's saying, okay, underneath her feet, which this is really close to being, is it's going to be sharp. And then in the background, it's not going to be, it's going to be soft in the background and the foreground. Again, hold down your Option key and click on this again. I think this gradient is a little too far back. It doesn't really hit where her feet are. So I'm going to simply click and pull a second time again, and you will get a new one. And you'll see we have just shifted the focus of this part underneath her, the floor underneath her feet is now sharp. The background is soft and the foreground is also soft. And then you simply so the gradient now is in the correct place. Double click on this blur to open it back up and drop it back to something that is believable, that it should really be. So I'm going to drop mine down, and it's probably, It may even be less than a 1. Use your preview box to turn it on and off. Yeah, it's a little bit less than 1. So I'm going to try it down to like a 0.7, something like that. Yeah, that actually seems much better to me. And say okay. And that's your composite. Questions about this? So, guys, if you're really interested in doing compositing, and I got the impression that a lot of people in this room were, this is the kind of work it actually takes and the way you need to be thinking about this. You need to think about building an image. How does it actually get built in your camera? Depth of field you can't ignore. We good? All right, guys. The only homework for the rest of the semester is working on your final project. So I will see you next week. We still will be working on things in class. So it's not going to be just come here and working on your final project in class. We've still got a ton of things that we need to go over, and I'll see you next week.